Pope Francis, the spiritual father of billions of Catholics worldwide, has rested in the Lord. Pope Francis' passing has left a silent but profound cut into the hearts of countless people. There were no resounding funeral bells, no grand farewell speeches, only a heavy silence that spread from the Vatican to every small church across the globe. A father has departed, a man who once knelt to wash the feet of monks, embraced the sick, and lived simply as a country priest in the palaces of the world, now has returned to God. But his departure did not close an era. It opened a pause, a moment for the entire church to reflect on the meaning of faith, tradition, and humility in a world so filled with greed. He did not just leave behind a legacy, he left us with a question. In these moments of farewell, perhaps the most important thing is not how he changed the church, but rather how he made us reconsider what the core of faith truly is. Pope Francis passed away just one day after unexpectedly appearing at the main balcony of St. Peter's Basilica to give the blessing to those attending the Easter Mass. The funeral of a pope, according to tradition, is a grand and solemn event. But Pope Francis recently approved plans for a simpler funeral. He also cancelled the traditional placing of a pope's body on a raised platform in St. Peter's Basilica for the public to visit. Instead, visitors will be invited to pay their respects while the Pope's body rests in an open casket. Furthermore, Pope Francis will be the first pope in over a century to be buried outside the Vatican. He will rest in a basilica in Rome, and his body will be displayed at St. Peter's Basilica. The funeral rites will last for 9 days, and the public will be allowed to visit the Pope. Cardinals will decide on the exact time for the funeral and will later meet at the Vatican to elect a successor to Pope Francis. Pope Francis, the spiritual leader of over 1.2 billion Catholics worldwide, had faced many health challenges over the years. He was born with the name Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Argentina and had to undergo part of his lung removed at the age of 21 due to illness. This wound not only left a mark on his body but also deeply influenced his entire life, as recurring bouts of pneumonia and shortness of breath remained. Whenever his health declined, the Vatican often had to adjust or quietly alter his public schedule. During these times, waves of concern and prayers flooded Catholic communities across the world. One of his close companions once shared that Pope Francis quietly said, "I entrust myself to the will of God." But beyond these physical struggles, it was the bold decisions of Pope Francis, where he would rest, how he would be remembered, and how he changed worship practices, that truly defined him as a pope unafraid to walk the ancient, humble path of tradition. Where will he rest? A quiet departure from an 8th-century-old tradition. For over 100 years, more than 90 popes, from St. Peter to recent predecessors, were buried beneath St. Peter's Basilica, a sacred, quiet place surrounded by marble and eternal light. However, in an interview in 2023 with Mexican journalist Valentina Alizaraki, Pope Francis expressed his final wish to be buried at the Church of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, a historic church from the 5th century, located in the heart of Rome's Esquiline district. This was not an arbitrary choice. He had visited this church more than 100 times, each time kneeling to pray before the image of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, a protector of the people of Rome, before and after his international trips. He said with a warm voice, "Here, I feel closer to my mother than ever before." This is a quiet yet profound departure from the nearly 800-year-old tradition of papal burials at the Vatican. A small but powerful act, born from personal devotion rather than institutional regulation. In a church where every symbol carries a sacred message, his decision resonates as a whisper of humility. A pope chose the motherly embrace of Our Lady over the royal tombs of predecessors. How will he be laid to rest? A funeral that has shocked many due to its simplicity. For centuries, papal funerals included 3 layers of caskets, wood, lead, and then another wooden layer, symbolizing eternity and the sacred role of the pope as Peter's successor. The casket was traditionally engraved with the Pope's seal, crosses, and other solemn symbols. But Pope Francis chose something entirely different. He wished to be placed in a simple wooden casket, lined with zinc. And that's it. This shocking decision was confirmed in the new funeral rites issued by the Vatican in 2024. This is not about material things, It's a sermon made of wood. A subtle declaration of a spirit of poverty that recalls Saint Francis of Assisi, the saint after whom Pope Francis took his papal name, who gave up everything to live in poverty and serve others. Imagine a global leader resting like a village priest. This image alone is enough to stir hearts and make millions of believers stop and reflect. Not only simplifying the casket, Pope Francis also changed the way the faithful will bid him farewell, an emotional departure. According to the updated funeral rites of 2024, the Pope's body will not be placed on a golden platform in St. Peter's Basilica, as tradition dictates, but in an open wooden casket, placed in a closed space where the faithful can approach, touch, and pray, not just stand at a distance. His departure will not be confirmed in a chapel filled with incense, but in his own private room, with no elaborate ceremonies, just silence and the small light of faith. And this is how Pope Francis lived and passed, not as a king, but as a father in the family. He washed prisoners' feet, embraced the sick, and spoke with the homeless. Even in his final moments, he wanted to be close to his people, not as a monarch but as a humble father. Pope Francis and the reshaping of Latin Mass tradition amid two divergent lines of thought. On July 16, 2021, Pope Francis issued the decree Traditionis Custodes, a decision that shook the world by severely limiting the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass, TLM, a practice established by Pope Pius VI in 1570 and had echoed through churches for nearly 400 years. The decision to restrict TLM caused division within the Church, with some faithful viewing it as a loss of a sacred tradition, while others saw it as healing an old wound that had divided the Church. As the first Jesuit pope born in Argentina, Pope Francis was not bound by nostalgia. He prioritized the apostolic mission over memories of the past. He did not reject the past but pruned it to bear fruit. For more than a decade, he has shifted the focus of the Church to welcoming refugees, condemning consumerism, and fighting excessive greed. And now, reviewing the liturgical rites. By choosing the Church of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception as his resting place, by choosing a simple wooden casket, by opening the doors for the faithful to come near him at his farewell, Pope Francis is not rejecting tradition but reshaping it in the light of today's gospel. Pope Francis is not just changing rituals, he is asking a bigger question for the whole Church: what is more important, the outward form or the inner heart? Historians call this a historical turning point, but Catholics feel it as a spiritual challenge. His papacy, which began in 2013, may end not with the ringing of bells, but with a whisper that will resonate through generations. His legacy will continue to be pondered by future generations, and every time his health declined, the world held its breath, as if the heart of the Church was beating more slowly. From Manila to Milwaukee, silent prayers were lifted up. The rosary was tightly gripped in hands, and the hope was placed in a father who was weakening but never giving up. But there is a bitter truth: no matter how devoted a shepherd is, he cannot avoid stepping through the final door of human life, where the Lord opens his arms to welcome him. The sacrifices and changes Pope Francis made are not just real stories but mirrors reflecting our own faith. A place of rest outside the Vatican. A simple wooden casket that anyone could make. A liturgical debate still ongoing. These are all the footprints Pope Francis has left in the heart of the Church that he loved deeply enough to change. They are not loud, but they pierce the heart. A Roman priest's words still echo in silence. May the Lord keep our Holy Father, the one who shows us faith through small things. For Catholics, this is not an exaggeration. This is a holy ground where every small decision, every quiet choice can awaken a whole spiritual life. Many years after he has rested, perhaps the decisions made today will still resonate, causing us to pause, share, pray, and ask ourselves what tradition really is if not love that bends down for humanity. And so, the life of Pope Francis, unlike fireworks blazing through the night, burned quietly, like a small flame that warmed the Church in an age of turmoil. He left no grand titles, no lavish palaces, no monumental legacies, but what he left was a living gospel spirit, faith that is close, humble, and present beside the poor, the forgotten, and the small. In his quiet departure, The whole church is invited into a season of spiritual reflection to remember that this Father did not just live to lead but lived to bear witness to a love without borders, a love not afraid of being misunderstood, not needing applause, just faithfulness. He lived and passed as a beloved child of the church, a shepherd who bore the wounds of the church not by power but through boundless mercy. We do not weep for an era ending, we bow our heads before a humble builder of the kingdom, constructing the kingdom of heaven with each stone of sacrifice, courage, and compassion. May the soul of Pope Francis rest in the loving embrace of God, and may what he sowed today bloom into the holy harvest in the hearts of all believers.